Jacob was a young man filled with adventure and longing for something meaningful in his life. On the evening of April 5, 2017, he loaded his red, specialized hard rock bicycle emblazoned with Milwaukee tools and won by his father Randy at a contractor's raffle with camping supplies and pedaled straight into one of the harshest wilderness areas in the Pacific Northwest, Olympic National Park. Then, alone on an isolated trail deep within Olympic National Park, there was no blood, no footprints, no evidence of any fight, just complete silence. Park rangers conducted searches, helicopters flew overhead scanning the area, but found nothing. Days became weeks, weeks became months, until over a year later, something emerged from the wilderness. What they discovered will challenge everything you believed about venturing into the wild alone. The first witness to see Jacob while he was alive was a local man near Indian Valley on April 5th. Later, a woman noticed someone dragging a red trailer up Firome Hill at 1 o'clock in the morning. But it was the third encounter that would disturb investigators for years to come. A woman driving along Soul Duck Hot Springs Road observed Jacob struggling uphill, battling against his heavy equipment just 2 miles from Highway 101. Several hours later, as she drove back down the mountain, she saw something that made her curious enough to pull over and snap a photograph. There, 6.3 miles up the river road, Jacob's bicycle and trailer sat completely abandoned. The location didn't make any sense. It wasn't suitable for camping or even for hiding a bicycle. His equipment sat in full view, only 10 yards from the road and 20 feet from the rushing Soul Duck River. A plastic tarp was laid out on the ground, encircled by camping gear, as though someone had been sorting through their belongings. But here's the detail that still sends chills down people's spines. 4 arrows were planted in the earth in a precise east-west formation near the tarp. Why would Jacob stick arrows in the ground? Was it some kind of message, a sign for someone who might come searching, or something much more disturbing? Park rangers discovered the scene the following morning, April 6th. The bicycle was in working condition with properly inflated tires and no evidence of any crash. Most of Jacob's belongings remained undisturbed. It appeared as if he had simply walked away from everything he possessed and disappeared into the forest. Ranger John Bowie requested additional help. Perhaps the cyclist had walked to the river to collect water and accidentally fallen in. The Soul Duck flows cold and swift, fed by melting snow from the Olympic Mountains. In water below 40 degrees, a person would survive for minutes, not hours. But as rangers examined the riverbank, a frightening understanding began to take hold. Jacob Gray wasn't simply missing. He had vanished completely without leaving any trace, leaving behind only mysteries and those 4 puzzling arrows pointing toward an explanation no one could comprehend. A person isn't officially considered missing until someone files a missing person report. In Jacob's situation, nobody did for 3 days. His bicycle remained by the river while rangers believed he was on a brief hiking expedition. It wasn't until April 7th that Ranger Brian Ray discovered a list of telephone numbers in Jacob's belongings and contacted his sister Mallory. The news struck the Gray family like a bolt of lightning. Jacob's father Randy grabbed his wetsuit, threw it in his truck, and drove all night from Santa Cruz to Washington. He was stopped by police for driving 100 miles per hour in Oregon. When he explained the emergency, the officer released him with a warning: just drive safely. But when Randy and Mallory reached Olympic National Park, they made a shocking discovery. No official search operation had been started. The park was short-staffed because of budget reductions, with 2/3 of their law enforcement staff reassigned to other locations. They were dealing with an airplane crash and another missing person case. Jacob's situation was being handled as a low priority. The family was astounded. Time is critical in search and rescue operations, and 5 valuable days had already been lost. Randy put on his gear and dove into the Soul Duck River himself. looking behind waterfalls and under fallen trees where a body might be caught. The water was so frigid it made him gasp for air. But he continued diving, continued searching, continued hoping. What frustrated the family most was the red tape. Olympic National Park functions like an independent nation. External search teams couldn't assist without official authorization. The Coast Guard, just minutes away by helicopter, was denied permission to help. Volunteer dog teams were turned away in favor of park-approved teams that never showed up. Jacob's Aunt Elise finally confronted Ranger Ray directly. "We, as Jacob Gray's family, demand an intensive search," she said firmly. The ranger simply responded, "Okay," but nothing changed. Randy searched wearing cotton clothing under a plastic rain suit, developing painful foot conditions from constantly wet socks. He pushed through Devil's Club plants that ripped through his gloves, cutting his hands, but he never complained. Every day he didn't discover Jacob's body meant another day his son might still be breathing. The longer the search went on, the more questions arose. Why would Jacob plan a trip going east to Vermont, then travel west without informing anyone? Why leave his bicycle unlocked and visible with equipment scattered around? And what was the meaning of those 4 arrows? From where Jacob's bicycle was discovered, the Soul Duck River flows 78 miles to the Pacific Ocean. If he had fallen in, experts in swiftwater rescue said he couldn't have traveled very far, perhaps a mile at most. The river was extremely dangerous in April, swollen with snowmelt and rushing fast through a series of hazardous log blockages. Olympic mountain rescue volunteers finally showed up nearly a week after the bicycle was found. They discovered evidence that someone had switched from hiking boots to running shoes near the water's edge. There were scratches on a moss-covered rock suggesting someone had slipped and fallen into the water. 30 yards downstream, they found signs that someone might have climbed back out, but tracking isn't a precise science. The conclusions were nothing more than educated assumptions. The evidence could have been left by anyone or by no one at all. 2 search dogs detected something at a log jam downstream, their handlers becoming excited about the possible breakthrough. But when divers searched the jam multiple times, they discovered nothing. The scent could have originated from numerous sources, carried downstream by the water flow. Randy personally dove into every promising spot, not trusting anyone else to be thorough enough. He attached himself to ropes and lowered himself into pools behind waterfalls. He literally used his body as a raft down the North Fork of the Soul Duck, stopping to examine caves and deep pools where a body might be stuck. The search was taking a physical toll on him. His body was covered with bruises from hitting against rocks. He wasn't eating properly, drinking only river water, pushing himself to the point of exhaustion. But he couldn't quit. Every pool might contain his son. A pair of Burnside brand shorts in Jacob's size was discovered a couple of miles downstream and sent to the crime laboratory in Seattle for DNA analysis. The results came back negative, another false hope in a case filled with dead ends. By this time, the park had reclassified Jacob's case as a passive search, meaning no additional resources would be committed unless new evidence appeared. For Randy, this was completely unacceptable. If the park wouldn't search for his son, he would do it himself. Randy Gray made a choice that would shape the remainder of his life. He shut down a profitable construction company in Santa Cruz and devoted himself completely to finding Jacob. He sold the family house, purchased a diesel pickup truck and slide-in camper, and basically relocated to the Olympic Peninsula. The search grew beyond the river. Jacob's sister Mallory had given him throwing knives for Christmas, and they weren't found with his abandoned equipment. Neither were his crampons for mountain climbing, a warm jacket, a water filter, or his camelback backpack. Maybe Jacob hadn't fallen into the river at all. Maybe he had left his bicycle on purpose. Randy began considering possibilities that terrified him: human trafficking, cult recruitment. Jacob was an attractive young man who had done some modeling in Santa Cruz. What if someone had targeted him, convinced him to leave his bicycle with a story about needing assistance. At 2 in the morning, Randy walked the streets of Port Angeles, talking to drug users and homeless individuals, anyone who might have encountered his son. There were reported sightings, but none led anywhere. Jacob seemed to have simply evaporated. Mallory shared her theory with her father. Jacob was truly lost, she explained. He didn't know what he wanted to do with his life, where he wanted to go, what he wanted to become. The condition of the world had depressed him. Maybe he chose to vanish into the wilderness intentionally. The family had been concerned about Jacob's mental state. The divorce had affected him deeply, losing the cherished family home where he had grown up. His mother, Laura, said he was struggling with adulting. A cross-country bicycle journey was supposed to help him discover himself, give him direction and meaning. But there were worrying signs. The Bible found with Jacob's equipment had Isaiah 34:14 circled in dark ink, "And the desert creature shall meet with the wolves, the hairy goat also shall cry to its kind. Yes, the night monster shall settle there." What message had Jacob been seeking in those haunting apocalyptic verses? Sorry for the interruption. Before we continue with the story, I kindly ask you to like the video and subscribe to this channel. It is very important for us. Thank you very much. Randy continued searching, continued hoping. He bought a small folding bicycle and took ferries to the San Juan Islands, checking organic farms where Jacob might be working under a false name. He returned repeatedly to the Soul Duck, searching the same 12-mile section of river more completely than any mountain waterway had ever been searched. By August 2017, Randy had been living on the road for months, changing locations impulsively, sleeping in his camper wherever the search led him. What should have been every wealthy man's fantasy-complete freedom to travel had become his worst nightmare. He had lost his son, and nothing else had any importance. The August full moon appeared red, filtered through enormous wildfire smoke drifting down from British Columbia. Randy was staying at a place called The Barn, owned by Bigfoot researchers who had opened their property to assist in the search for Jacob. The building was filled with rifle cases, charging headlights, and plaster casts of giant footprints. Derek Randalls and his Olympic mountain response team had hiked 730 miles searching for Jacob, crossing terrain beyond their own maps. These were Bigfoot researchers, the kind of people Randy never imagined he'd be working with, but desperation makes strange allies. Nobody knew the mountains above the Soul Duck better. They understood that locating one person in that enormous wilderness was almost impossible, but they kept trying. Randy had been conducting 12 to 14-hour search days for 4 months straight. His body was deteriorating, but his determination never weakened. "I didn't plan any of this," Randy said. "Jacob's my buddy. Do you think I want to be out here searching for my son?" He preferred to keep moving because stopping meant thinking, and thinking led to dark places. Randy spoke about Jacob in the present tense, while Jacob's mother Laura had started using the past tense. The difference was heartbreaking and revealing. "I'm going to give Jacob this camper when I find him," Randy told me. "He'll love it. We can attach the surfboards on top and just live at the beach." The search had taken over Randy's life, but he couldn't imagine stopping. Somewhere out there, his son needed him. Dead or alive, Jacob deserved to be found. But time was running out, and the wilderness was winning. On Friday, August 10th, a team of biologists studying marmots in the high country made a discovery that would finally provide some answers while creating many more questions. Near the summit of a ridge above Hull Lake, 300 feet above sea level and at least 15 miles from where Jacob had left his bicycle, they found human remains. The location was breathtaking in its isolation. Jacob's body wasn't near any trail. In April 2017, the terrain would have been covered with snow and subject to avalanches. How had he traveled so far from his abandoned bicycle? Why had he climbed upward instead of following the river down to safety? Ranger Ray told Randy not to climb the mountain, to allow the professionals to handle their work. But Randy ignored the warning. "What would you do?" he asked. "When does a father stop being a father?" Racing up the mountain alone, Randy missed the rangers who were carrying Jacob's remains down. During his descent above Deer Lake, he encountered other rangers performing CPR on a 29-year-old woman from Iowa who had suffered cardiac arrest. Randy stayed to help, taking turns with chest compressions. One of the rangers had just been part of the team that brought Jacob down from the mountain. Despite their efforts, the woman died. The official cause of Jacob's death was listed as inconclusive. The Clallam County coroner identified him through dental records. He had been carrying a cigarette lighter, insulated clothing, plenty of food, and another Bible his grandfather's. Jacob had everything he needed to survive, yet somehow he didn't. Most disturbing of all, his boots were found wrapped in trash bags, a detail that haunted his brother Micah, who wondered if it might be a sign of suicide. "People do crazy things before they commit suicide," Micah said quietly. Hypothermia was the probable cause of death. But that explained how he died, not why. What had caused this strong, capable young man to die alone on a barren ridge miles from where anyone was searching for him? The questions that had troubled the search now became urgent. Why had Jacob planned an eastbound journey, then traveled west without telling anyone? Why park his bicycle unlocked and visible with gear spread out? Why were 4 arrows stuck in the ground? Had he been trying to leave a message about his real destination? Most significantly, Jacob's remains were found on an exposed ridge that might have been visible from aircraft if helicopters had been sent immediately after finding his abandoned bicycle. Could he have been found alive? The truth about Jacob Gray may be simpler and more meaningful than anyone imagined. Dr. Robert Coaster, author of the Search and Rescue Manual, Lost Person Behavior, offered insight that finally made sense of the mystery. Children will often go up, Coaster explained. So will people on a vision quest, depending on what message they get from God. I have seen people climb mountains. Jacob had been seeking answers in his Bible, marking passages about desert creatures and night monsters. His family worried about his mental health after his parents' divorce and the loss of his childhood home. He was struggling with the transition to adulthood, searching for direction and purpose. What if Jacob's bicycle ride wasn't intended to be a cross-country tour? What if it was the start of a spiritual journey into the wilderness, a quest for meaning that led him higher into the mountains instead of down to safety? The 4 arrows stuck in the ground may not have been a message for rescuers. They might have been Jacob's own compass, pointing toward his chosen path into the high country where he believed he would find the answers he desperately needed. Randy Gray was correct from the beginning. Jacob would go up, he said. Most lost adults head downhill toward civilization, but Jacob climbed toward something else entirely. In the end, Jacob Gray found what he was looking for on that remote ridge above Hull Lake. Whether it was peace, understanding, or simply an end to his struggles, we'll never know. But his story reminds us that sometimes the greatest mysteries aren't about what happened to someone, they're about what was happening inside them all along. The wilderness called Jacob Gray home, and in its own way, it gave him exactly what he was searching for. The tragedy is that it came at a price his family will spend the rest of their lives paying. Jacob's story isn't just about a missing person case. It's about a young man's search for meaning in a world that had left him feeling lost and alone. In the end, he found his answer not in the pages of a Bible, but in the silence of the mountains, where the only voice that mattered was his own. Did you enjoy this story? If you were in Jacob's place, alone in the wilderness and searching for purpose, what would you have done? Let us know in the comments below. If you liked the story, subscribe to this channel and leave a like. We all get lost sometimes. What matters is not giving up. Thanks so much for listening. See you in the next video. Have a great day.